Now, it's my pleasure to introduce someone who very clearly, as the reaction when he walked into the room showed, needs no introduction to the podium, to an event he has been to many, many times over the decades. Senator Sanders, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for the introduction. I am truly delighted to be with you this afternoon because in my life there has been, I think, no greater political influence than Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And I want to thank Patrick. Where is Patrick? Patrick's still here. Barry is way in the back. As the mayor indicated, Patrick has been doing this year after year after year. And I think our community owes Patrick an enormous debt of gratitude. Patrick, thanks so much for what you've done. The reason that this event is so very important, as are events like this throughout the country, is that we come together not only to honor one of the outstanding leaders of the 20th century, but in fact, one of the great leaders in American history. And it is imperative, for the sake of our children and our grandchildren, and for the future of this country, that we never forget what Dr. King stood for and what his vision for our country was all about. And obviously that is especially important given this moment in American history and given the current occupant of the White House and his ugly and destructive efforts to divide our country up based on our race, based on our religion, based on our sexual orientation, or our nation of origin. Unlike Donald Trump, Dr. King understood that all of us, black and white and Latino and Asian American, Native American, gay, straight, male, female, all of us share a common humanity with common human aspirations. Unlike Trump, he did not believe that people from Africa or Haiti were living, forgive my language, in shitholes. On the contrary, he looked forward to a day, and I quote, when people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Dr. King was an extraordinary leader because of his intelligence. Read his writing, listen to his words. He was an extraordinary leader because of his organizing capabilities. This is all one man, a writer, a great orator, but what he understood, it was not good enough to give speeches. You had to organize at the grassroots level. He understood that change never takes place, not then, not now, from the top on down, but always from the bottom on up. And from the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, when he was all of 26 years of age, to the Great March on Washington for Jobs and Justice in 1963, to the Poor People's March in 1968, and campaign after campaign after campaign. His job and his people were organizing Americans, African Americans, but people of all backgrounds to stand up for justice. He was an extraordinary leader because of his vision for a new America that was not just about ending racism, as enormously important as that is, but to create a nation of economic and social justice. Now, you may not see this on TV too much, but please never forget where he was when he was assassinated. He was in Memphis, Tennessee, not involved in, quote unquote, a civil rights march. He was standing up for unionized sanitation workers who were fighting for decent wages and decent working conditions. And he understood always that it was not just good enough to break down barriers to education or to restaurants or to hotels. But that didn't mean anything if people did not have the income to get into those schools and into those hotels and into that restaurant. So Dr. King was a fighter for social and economic justice. And the last campaign that he was involved in, anyone remember what that was? It was the Poor People's Campaign. And he was assassinated before he was able to bring it to fruition. But what that campaign was about was bringing African Americans and bringing Latinos and whites and Native Americans together to demand an economy that worked for all people, including the poor, and not just upper-income people. And he asked then, how does it happen that the country had unlimited sums of money to spend on war and the military, but somehow there was not enough money to abolish poverty in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world? And that question was right back in the 1960s, and it is more important even today. Because as we speak, literally today, and I'll be on a plane Monday night, Tuesday, going back to Washington, some of my Republican colleagues want to increase military spending by $180 billion over a 2-year period. $180 billion, while at the same time they want to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, nutrition programs, and education. The fight that King fought back in the 60s is exactly the fight that we have got to engage in today. Dr. King was an extraordinary leader because of his courage, and that's an easy word to throw out. He was courageous. Of course he was courageous. He was courageous when he stood up to racism in the South when his life was in danger. Took an enormous amount of courage. But he stood up in his life not only to white racism, he stood up later in his life to a political establishment when he said, I cannot be honest and talk about nonviolence and support the war in Vietnam. And I want you all to know what that act of courage was about. Because when he did that, and people don't know this today, he was taking on the liberal political establishment. He was taking on the corporate media. And what the media was saying to him is, they say, okay, you're allowed to be a civil rights leader, you did a great job, but who do you think you are about talking about national priorities and the U.S. budget? Who do you think you are talking about whether or not we should be in Vietnam? That's not your place. But with extraordinary courage, and by the way, he sacrificed a whole lot of fundraising capabilities when you take on the President of the United States and the liberal establishment. But he said, with unbelievable courage, I cannot be who I am. I cannot be honest with myself, honest with the people I represent, if I talk about nonviolence in the United States and don't address the most violent war in the nation's history. That, brothers and sisters, is incredible courage. Today, we honor Dr. King by attending this event, and during the week there'll be wonderful events all over the country. I'll be in North Carolina next week. But the truth is, if we really honor Dr. King, it is not just coming to events. If we honor Dr. King, like him, we have got to stand up and have the courage to take on those forces of racism and oppression which are doing so much damage today. This is a pivotal moment in American history, and we need every person in this room and every person in this country to begin to come together to fight for Dr. King's vision, a vision which says that in America we will not tolerate racism and, by extension, sexism and homophobia and other forms of bigotry, that in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, we are going to get our priorities right, not give tax breaks to billionaires, not spend endlessly on war and the military, but make certain that every man, woman in this country has the quality of life and the standard of living that he or she is entitled to. Thank you all very much.